Welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today is the 1st of November, and first I would like to thank the volunteer and Shaw staff for making this show possible. And in the first part of today's interview show, we have with us Elder Tom Sampson to talk about the latest news and issue that matter to the Indigenous community. Welcome, Elder Tom, to the show once again, and it's really honor and privilege to have you to tell us about what you think about latest issues. So what do you like to talk today about, Elder Tom?
Well, I guess the thing that concerns all of us, not only Indigenous people, but the people across this country, across the province, is the whole issue of resource management. It really has a major effect on everything that's important to not only Indigenous people, but people of this province, this island where we live. And it's, even though there have been many promises made, you know, during the campaign, and those promises have got to be kept, because I think people may have forgotten what the Premier said, you know, that in this province, the issue of Kinder Morgan and Site C, that they would do everything in their power to make sure that it stops. Well, that's not what I see happening.
Not the case now.
What I see happening is the government trying to find a way to look for a weak spot where they can still do the same job, and just like what the Liberals did, no different. So I think the people of this province, we really have to this time take note of what they're doing and what they're saying, because we can't let them get away with it every time, you know. And we know from experience that governments are led by the corporate world, the donations that come in, and the way they sometimes conceal those kind of contributions made to different parties within the provincial and federal government. So I think we need to find a way in which we can convince these people who are in power in terms of the provincial government. We know from experience that we've had very little say in this country, in this province. And it stems back right from the beginning of Canada becoming a country, separating from Great Britain, and the promises made by the first leadership in this country, the prime ministers and the premiers that have gone through the stage of developing what they think is good for Canada. But what we need to understand, or try to understand, is it really for Canada? When we look at the whole issue of resources, gas, oil, timber, mining, does BC really benefit from it? Are we really the beneficiaries of this exploitation of the land, that especially Indigenous people? Because we are the original owners of this land, and the Supreme Court of Canada has said that the fully informed consent has to happen. If that doesn't happen, then the tribes more likely will continue to go to court, and the citizens of this province are the ones that pay for it. They're what they call the taxpayers. Now, the budget for the Site C thing, you know, is so far over budget now, and there's billions of dollars that has been paid out. And even though the people who've looked at it, studied it, said they didn't play by the rules of the original agreement on Site C. They didn't do that. And as a result of that, they're getting all these overruns now and costs. And some people are just saying, well, what the heck? They've done it before. We might as well just go along with it. That doesn't solve the problem. When we look at Site C and look at Kinder Morgan, and we look at the effects of the environment, it's not just about Indigenous people, it's about the people of this province. We see the resources disappearing, and we see the different development happening around us. And when I look at the Indian Act, and I've had to look at that, even though I don't like it, I still got to look at it and read why it's like that. The province of the provincial government and the federal government had to create links to make their success happen, whether it's on an Indian land or Indigenous land. They had to find a way to develop a process which would allow them to penetrate traditional land. Well, they've done that through the Indian Act. But now that the Supreme Court has said that until there's true informed consent, nothing is going to happen. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some consultation based on a formula set out by the Supreme Court. If they don't do that, then it's not only the Indigenous people that are going to, stop it, make it resist. It's going to be everybody. It has to be everybody this time. I think looking at the media, the social media they call, it's entirely up to the First Nations now to say something about stopping Kinder Morgan and Site C. Well, why does it have to be us? We didn't create the problem. Why do they point the finger in our direction? And there's a lot of reasons, I think, why that happens. Because we're more vulnerable, and because we don't have money to fight in court, in the courts across this country. So that's what I see happening now. And it's going to turn ugly, I think, because it's not because we don't want to plan for the future. It's because what's happened to us right now, at this moment. For example, in the fishing industry, mm-hmm. It's just literally gone, there was no sockeye this year. And the chum salmon there's hardly anything coming back. And it's because of the issue regarding the environment and the pollution in the ocean. And people are dancing around that. They're saying, well, we're going to fix it before the next election. That's what they said the last time, and the time before that.
Like a process of manipulation.
Yeah. So we're beginning to wonder, who can we talk to that really actually wants to talk about the truth? Mm-hmm. The truth about reconciling not only with the First Nations of this country, province, but with the people itself. What about let's look at this then. What about the commercial fishermen? How many guys have lost their boats? How many guys are, got caught up in a buyout program? How come that happened? So we had to look at the why. How come and why did it happen? And we find out that most of the boats owned in this province are owned by corporations. So, and they hold the licenses and everything. So people again then are being bought out and moved out of the way in terms of the fishing industry. And we don't have a say in that. So we look far north, way up the northern end of Canada, up into the Alaska, see what's happening up there. How come? Well, what they call the Pacific Salmon Commission are the ones that regulate the fishery for the whole coast. And by the time that quotas are set out at that period of time with each fishing season, by the time the fish reach here, there's nothing, there are no more fish left because they're overfishing. Uh-huh. And I don't know what we're going to do. Well, I was talking to some of our people just today, in fact, and they said we have no fish. There are no more sockeye, and to get one, you got to pay a leg and an arm to buy a fish now, because it's too expensive now to get the sockeye that we used to get all the time. And what we're ending up with is fish farms and hatcheries, and that seems to be the reason why they're pushing, because they know the natural salmon that ordinarily runs through the waters in the Pacific coast of British Columbia. It's just not there anymore. So the fish farming people that are determined to turn it into a big business, which they've already done, because it brings millions of dollars to this province in terms of the sales of fish farm salmon and other species that they're being responsible or being held or being developing it without any real responsibility, because the pollution that's going into the ocean, and it's been well documented, the problem that it's creating, but it doesn't stop the corporation, because the governments, provincial and federal government, are not prepared to stop it. So you look at the mining industry, you look at Site C, you look at the other issues, we're going down the same road. In the end, it's going to happen whether we like it or not. That's what's happening.
Okay. Elder Tom, I'm sure you're aware that the same mining company who is doing this damage in Canada are also going internationally, like South America, Africa, everywhere, doing the same kind of business, the same kind of mining, the same kind of environmental damage. In this regard also to many, like we know that many activists in unions in South America been harassed and even some of them killed by some mining police service. Nobody can dare talk to these businesses, not inside and not outside. Now we have, on the other hand, we have United Nations Declaration about Indigenous people rights. Can the Indigenous community here call for support from international help, especially that again the damage is done here. It's not only done here; it's done also outside. So it's the same story. It's not separate. Is there a way, kind of, to call for support? Add to that the fact that also always kind of try to protect its image around the world. So maybe when some pressure internationally about this issue, then the Canadian government start to act in different manner. What do you think about that?
Well, we've seen what happened in other countries, in the United States, for example, you know, when they were protesting that pipeline that went through the Dakotas.
North Dakota.
The army came out with their tanks and guns, and they were willing to kill. And I think that's what a lot of people are driven by, fear, because they don't want, no one wants to die, even though we know how important things are, the resources. And we see it happening not only in North America, but all over the world, where people are literally walking in front and say, okay, we don't have a choice anymore. You're going to have to kill me. And that's what's happening. You know, people are just saying, if we don't get what our share of what's happening, you might as well kill us.
Actually, they are killing us in a different way, by mercury, by a lot of poisoning in our water and our food in the end.
Well, here in Canada, and the Great Lakes of eastern Canada, they had mercury in that water there for about 50 years. And they knew it. They knew that it was already poisoned, but they kept letting those people fish and eat those fish that were contaminated with mercury. They let it happen. So people in government don't really care. You know, I mean, we've seen it happen. The people in Atlantic Canada who were wanting to fish for lobsters, you know, we've seen what fisheries done there. You know, I see it on TV. They were literally just running over them with their big boats. So the idea of intimidation has not changed. They talk with words, and then eventually you see a blockade, and eventually you end up with confrontation. It always leads there.
So because this is the way how to deal with a government that doesn't care, I mean,
well,
or
the
is not
government,
listening.
you see, again it comes to the shadow government. They're the ones who are really determining what happens. In terms of trade in this country, you know, the free trade agreement they talk about with the different countries. Well, Canada, I think, you know, is trying to find some kind of balance, but you got powers like the United States who really don't care about anything except themselves. And it isn't the Americans, by the way, either. It's by the corporations. When you look at their structure of government in the United States, most of these people are billionaires, and they're the ones deciding what happens in North America, in fact, whether it's
just
in
North
Canada
America.
or in the United States.
And the whole world.
Yeah,
Look what happened in Iraq. Look what happened in Afghanistan, in Syria, where I came from. It's all these countries are dismantled because of the American policy, and again, all based on resource extraction or pipeline routes, and it's the same old story.
It's not a hopeless case. It's not as if it's the end of the world. You know, what I see happening and what I see young people happening now, and I see the people at the community level saying, okay, that's enough. Let's do something. So that kind of tragedy is now developing, happening all across country. About the murdered women and girls, we see people saying, what you have done doesn't work. And it goes back to right to the beginning of the first prime minister of this country. They were savages, so they're expendable. It doesn't matter whether they get murdered or not. But here now, in the year 2017, the citizens of this country and this province are paying an arm and a leg now to try to straighten out that mess that was created right from the beginning. So people are beginning to get motivated. And we're talking this way now in a lot of our communities. We've got to re-educate our own people now. We've got to tell them, look, this is what life was like 500 years ago. This is what it was like even 50 years ago. We have to look back at that. The footprints of our ancestors, we have to look back and see, why were we so successful? How come? How come we let it go? Why did we let it happen? Well, it's clear, you know, for us, those of us that have seen it happen, you know, the well-documented documentaries that have been put on across Canada, it clearly tells the story. But it doesn't seem like it's enough for the people of this country to say, what did we do? How come we done that? You know, there has to be at some point, and I've seen a very small glimpse of it here in Victoria during Orange Shirt Day when the mayor spoke. She said, we Canadians, and we people in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, we got rich off the backs of the Indigenous people. And we've never ever said, we're sorry we did this. We're sorry that we never allowed you to participate in the development of this province. In fact, in one of the books that I was given to me by a friend about the Songhees people right here in Victoria. The Songhees people were very, very helpful when the colonizers came. They helped them with different things, food, the fur trade with the Hudson Bay Company. They did everything. Laboring, cutting timber for the mills at the very minimum wages. Then one day, the city of Victoria said, we can't hire you no more because you don't pay taxes. So they let the Indian workers go, First Nations workers go, because they weren't paying taxes. So you see that kind of information, that kind of history that we're now living with. A lot of the people in the community level are saying nothing has changed. You know, when I look at my village, building houses, all the houses we build now are owned by the banks or by Central Mortgage and Housing. So they annex that land, they take that land away. And if we don't pay for it, they become the owners of that land. So that's happening. It's a slight trick, you know. If you want a house, here's how you can live like, it's like what Sir Jane MacDonald said. Educate these Indians so they can live like white people. And well, we've learned how to live like white people, but we don't know how. You know, we still want to remember who we are. We still want to know what our culture, our history, our language, ceremonies, that has to stay alive. We can't let it go. So when we look at an election, a campaign like the one that just went by, and the federal government, the prime minister of those countries saying, we will walk with you hand in hand and we will solve this problem together. Well, that's not happening. The premier of this province said, I'll go to my toolbox and I will use every tool I got to stop Kinder Morgan. Well, that's not happening. So we have to, at some point, the Indigenous people, along with the citizens of this province now, have got to take a look at what's happening. The farmers that own land up in the interior of British Columbia, where Site C is going through, they just expropriated people's land. Doesn't matter who you are, government runs over you. Or the corporate shadow, you know, the shadow government. They don't care. You know, they have the resources, the legal expertise, hiring people, that how to defend their interest. First Nations people, Indigenous people don't have that. We don't have that kind of money. So we end up going to court knowing that hopefully some judge will listen and understand what we're doing or what's happening. And it is working, you know. When I look back 30 years ago, when we looked at the justice system and the elders said, let's talk to the guy that's prosecuting us, putting us in jail. So we got two of the young people and some of the leadership together and said, okay, let's see who we can talk to. So we talked to the Attorney General of British Columbia, Attorney General of Canada, and they said, we want to talk to you because we don't like going to jail over treaty rights, the right to hunt and fish. We don't like that. We don't want to go to jail anymore. So we began to educate the judge. We told him, look, this is who we are. We've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. These were young judges. So as we traveled across the country, from Victoria right on through British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, we took elders with us and we walked across the country to each place. And those young lawyers and young judges ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada. And that's what we got to do again. It's not just, again, it's just not indigenous people. The average citizen of this country has got to realize it may be the law according to those who can afford it, but we have to bring the law within the reach of those people who can't afford it. See, there's a lot of people like that. I mean, I work on the Pro Board of Canada and the Corrections Canada, and it's not just Indian people there, Indigenous people. I see a lot of young white kids there, Japanese, Chinese, East Indians, all in jail. You know, so how they got there is because they never had a chance. They come from a poor family, poverty family, the majority of them, not all of them. And what I learned from working with Corrections Canada, and as I talked to the inmates in all of these institutions in British Columbia, you know, they're the same as a First Nations person. They couldn't afford to defend themselves.
Because the bottom line is about, in the end, about economy. It's about who have and who don't have. I mean, between rich and poor in the end. And the whole process in the beginning, actually, for a European colonial settler to come here, it's for acquire wealth. And as you said, it wouldn't go to the majority of the people. No, only to the top, maybe 10 or 5%.
Yeah, well, I think people are beginning to understand that. You know, it's a slow process because just as we begin to move towards get some movement, the government comes along and they put more money in the pot to keep us busy, you know, and keep like, for example, social assistance here in Victoria, they said, well, they're getting $600 a month, we'll pull it up to $1,000 a month. Well, everybody got happy. But when you look at it, really take a hard look at it. The cost of living in any home in Victoria, it's beyond their reach. That's why you got people sleeping in the street now, you know, homeless people.
And especially
all over the place, you know. But it's like Colonel Powell said, you know, until governments get ashamed of what they're doing, nothing's going to change. They have to get ashamed of what they're doing.
And how?
Well, when that orange shirt day, going back to the mayor now, when she said, we got rich off the backs of these people. What can we do to help one another again now? She's trying to reach out. And like I said at the last time, I never heard anybody say that before, a political leader. How can we help? How can we get, I mean, we've all gotten these people who are rich now. How can we give something back to these people? We took their land away. We took their hunting and fishing rights away. We took their children away. We stole their children. We farmed them out all over Canada, United States, including Europe. That's where our children went. Somebody took them away. So now we hear a mayor saying, what can we do? Well, I told one person, come to my house, come to my village, visit me, take a look at how I have to live, where I'm living, and understand that we're not asking for something. We don't want to become millionaires. We just want to live, survive, because we're barely surviving right now. You know, when I watched the news this morning with people in northern part of Canada, their children are still committing suicide, you know, and no one really wants to change it because of the policies and programs that governments have established. But it's going to be up to the people in the end. You know, one of the elders said to me long time ago, when I was a young chief at the time, he said, grandson, don't ever turn your back on a white man, because he'll hurt you. And I thought to myself, is it really about white people? And I don't think it is. I think color has got very little to do with the racism that's in this country. It's got very little to do with it. It's what the values they've put in place that's caused this division of people. We got to bring the middle class up. We got to bring these people up to a level where they can donate more money to the taxation system. Never mind those below the poverty level. Leave them there. That's what's being suggested. So when you listen to people who are willing to step into our world just for a few minutes, it would help. You know, I go down a river. I was down last weekend with my great-grandchildren. The one who was sitting here with me, the two girls. And the girls take their shoes off and they put their old runners on and they go in the water and they fish and they catch fish. And my grandson, he was supposed to come today, but he stayed home. He caught a nice little coho, a real late coho. The meat was nice and red. He took it home to his dad. He said, "Look what I caught." I never saw so much, seen a young 10-year-old boy, you know, hand this fish to his father and mother and say, "Look what I got." And that's what people got to see, that we'll survive. We're going to survive. It's just like I told you right at the beginning, when the Depression hit everybody, we never had that because we knew where to go to get our food and to survive. Well, we're still like that. We know how to survive. And so I guess the public, the general public, has to be convinced that they can do something, not just for us, but for themselves.
Exactly.
Because once we become, this one lady here in Ottawa, she says, "Why don't you people give up your Indian status?" What difference does it make whether we have status or not? Nothing changes. Mm-hmm. Our people tried that. They got enfranchised. They gave up their right to be Indian. They signed a paper. I'm going to be a white person now. I'm going to be a citizen of Canada. When they signed that paper, nothing changed. So we've learned our lesson by listening to government about how they want to continue to manipulate not only us,
but everybody else.
But everybody.
Elder Tom, we are actually out of time, but it's again always a pleasure and honor to listen and to hear what you have to say. And as you said, Indigenous community always will survive, and in the end it's come back to them to hold on their identity and culture and language, and that is the most important thing to start from.
That's where we're going.
Thanks again, Elder Tom, and thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice. Welcome back to the second part of Indigenous Voice. Today with us we have Raven, and from Raven we have Qatuwas and Simeon. Welcome to the show, and would you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and your work in Raven? Start with you, Qatuwas.
Thank you, Gasika, for having us. Over here on behalf of Raven, which is respecting Aboriginal values and environmental rights. So it's an organization that campaigns to raise legal funds for Indigenous people who are asserting their rights and titles over their traditional territories, including my own nation, which is the Heiltsuk Nation up in the central coast of British Columbia.
Okay, and Anna, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm on staff with Raven. I'm the campaigns manager, so I do all the day-to-day organizing of our various fundraising campaigns for the different cases that we work with, and that includes from Burrard Inlet up to the Peel River in the Yukon, and from the Heiltsuk all the way to the Beaver Lake Cree in northern Alberta. So we keep quite busy.
Today we are going to talk mainly about a case Raven is working on. Would you tell us a little bit? It's about the Heiltsuk First Nation and the spill in Billa Billa. So would you please tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. So basically, my nation, we are an isolated community on the central coast of British Columbia, an island just off the mainland, but we have over 16,000 square kilometers that is our territory that we've never ceded to the Canadian government. So we have 6 distinct nations who've amalgamated to make the Heiltsuk Nation. And from there, we have cultural groups and we have distinct authority over our lands and our waters. And we are a subsistence community where we have over 80% unemployment in the wintertime, and a large employment comes from commercial fisheries, including clams and salmon and halibut and all these different species that you'd find in Seaforth Channel, where there was over 110,000 liters of diesel spilt into our waterways. And it's always said that we have world-class tanker traffic spill response on our coast. And we didn't see that come into effect just over a year ago within Heiltsuk waters up in the central coast of British Columbia. And so we are now taking the Kirby Corporation to court over that. And so we're asserting our ancestral rights, our Indigenous rights over our lands and waterways. And I come from really strong people, and I'm really proud to come from the Central Coast, to come from the Heiltsuk Nation, and to see how we self-govern and we assert ourselves, and that we will no longer allow people to continue to encroach into our homelands and to make us one of the most impoverished people of this country, our own nation, where we depend on our lands and waters. So I'm grateful to come from the strong nation, and maybe Anna could speak also more to what we're doing with Raven.
Nice. So so the Heiltsuk First Nation approach Raven, and or Raven working with the Heiltsuk First Nation. Would you tell us a little bit about that work, Anna, with their case lately?
And it's just bringing it back as you speak, because I haven't been to Bella Bella myself, but I've seen the footage of the spill and what happened, and it's our most heartbreaking case. So even without seeing it, I can imagine, if it was here, and it might be here someday with the Kinder Morgan pipeline being proposed, we really need to get onto that. And marine safety is such a, whatever your political persuasion, like marine safety is so basic, and for that barge to have done this and then disappeared off the face of the earth and not taking responsibility is really something that no Canadian should just let pass. So Heiltsuk Nation approached us about earlier this year because they're preparing the case to take both the government and the Kirby Corporation to court. And that's how usually we get approached by nations who have already worked with their legal teams to create a case, and sometimes they have already filed it and sometimes they haven't filed it. So in this case, there is a lot that needs to happen before the case is filed, and we are now raising money for that. We are just at about $100,000 that we raised, and our goal in the first stage is to raise about $250,000 to make the case ready to go to court, because there is a lot of evidence that the federal government should have been gathering, but they are not. They're not doing an in-depth environmental assessment of what happened to the various shellfish and fish species and the ocean environment. They're not even thinking of looking at the community health, and when is the community going to be able to harvest shellfish again, and the economic impacts that affect both the food and ceremonial and social fishery and the commercial fishery that the Heiltsuk have. So we are really ramping up this campaign, and it'll be one of our flagship campaigns in the next year.
Okay. So you said that you have many other activity beside the legal process, so going, observing what's happening on the ground as well, assessment, and so what this is what Raven does.
Oh no, that's what is going to be done by. So the community members are going to do their own traditional science assessment the way it's been done through the generations on how assessing the health of the land and their own, so collecting and gathering the evidence and testimony.
The Heiltsuk Integrated Resource Management Department is working with our community and our leadership, our tribal council, and what we're doing is we're doing an assessment through Western science. So we're utilizing forms of science that will be recognized within the court system, but then also our knowledge that exists in our community from people who have spent a lifetime on this land and who have gained knowledge generation after generation. It's been passed down. So utilizing all of the knowledge that is accessible to us. And it is sad that we have to continuously assert ourselves and prove ourselves, and where information is being, where information is being withheld from our community, from both government and the Kirby Corporation. So when you have people who come in and are polluting within our territories, and how can we have a nation-to-nation agreements move forward when we're in this era of reconciliation and you're not even inviting the First Nations to the table? So how can we move forward in this era of reconciliation when we're not even invited into the conversation in the first place?
And what about media outlet in regard to talk about this issue? Is there any, I heard a little bit about Billa Billa spill before, but again, you don't hear about it all. You don't hear that there's a case actually going on.
So I think for the Heiltsuk Nation and the people who live in Bella Bella, we have worked with Raven in the past, and it was really successful relationship that was built against Enbridge. So we were one of the nations who successfully took Enbridge to court. And so maybe that's where you've heard of us before, or when we had some of our actions against the commercial herring fishery, the sacro fishery within our territory. So you see this common thread of our people. We're not just passively sitting by, but we're actively living off of our lands. Like I had the opportunity to go to Kwe Camp, our cultural camp, where we are taught how to harvest our foods in a way to exist in this relationship, and also come from a family where actively took me out onto the land and would leave me time to be by myself outside and to go on tribal journeys, Indigenous canoe gathering of people of the Pacific Northwest coast, to get that medicine from earth, to get that medicine from the ocean that covers over 70% of our world. And if we're constantly polluting it, whether that's with LNG, crude oil, or in this case, diesel, and it could have been much worse. So if we think about the ramifications that that will have for our coast, and as we're asserting ourselves as Indigenous people, the Heiltsuk Nation, and what's happening within our homelands, that can affect other nations, and looking at what does a spill response look like on the west coast of British Columbia.
What other nations are the Ravens working with recently?
Well, we have, I think, 14 nations now. 14. There is a group of 4 nations that are fighting Kinder Morgan, which is very much in the limelight right now. The Squamish will be in court against the provincial government authorizing Kinder Morgan and giving permits on Monday. All 4 were in federal court last month. So that's one of our prime cases right now. We are putting a lot of energy into that case. We are also working with the Chilcotin Nation, who are still fighting that mine threatening their sacred lake, Talta B, fish lake, because the company just won't give up, even though the government in this case has said no twice. The company is still pushing. So of course, these projects, you know, that's what you pointed out earlier. Fighting project by project is very costly, and it doesn't ultimately solve the problem. But very often, it saves immense tracts of land, and it saves cultures for the short term so that they can fight another day.
Plus, if we add fact, it's to bring also some awareness to the issue.
Yes.
To public.
Another case that we are really working on expanding right now is with the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, which is right at the heart of where all this oil is coming from in the tar sands in northern Alberta. So about 70 to 80% of their territory has been taken up by in situ tar sands oil wells and different infrastructure. Their caribou and their moose have been completely decimated. And so they're also taking the government to court over the fact that it's not just the one project, but the multiple combination of projects that are affecting their treaty rights.
I would like to ask you one more question, Anna, and I will hear from you, Qatuwas, about why the priority now for what happened in the Billa Billa and for the Heiltsuk First Nation?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Why what happened in Billa Billa taking a high priority on Raven agenda right now?
It is taking high priority because the case needs to get to court. So this preparation is crucial. While it's not in court, it's hard to get media, it's hard to get the public to understand the impact. And the community needs to be able to heal from what happened, and they need to get justice as soon as possible. So we are really wanting to support this preliminary work of getting all these expert reports done and filed into evidence so that it can be then brought to court, and then the company will have to answer for what they did.
Qatuwas, about the impact for the spill would you please tell us about that?
Yeah, so a big part for our community is we have a commercial clam digging industry, and that hasn't been able to be active, and we have over 20 different species that have been affected, and that we're still, I guess, gathering the cumulative effects of the spill. And so you can feel that in the heart of our community. And one thing for coastal Indigenous people, we are a very rare ecosystem on this planet, to have like an intact coastal rainforest. And if we don't have the biodiversity that comes from the ocean, we will no longer have the cultural diversity that comes from coastal Indigenous communities, because they're so intertwined. We can't separate ourselves from the ocean or from the land. And a huge part of our resources comes from those waters that have been drastically affected. And it is literally around the corner from the primary location of where the majority of our people live, which is the community of Bella Bella.
And it's the connection between the Indigenous community, the native people, and the land. It's so strong, and when you poison and destroy their water, I mean, it's just common sense. And the other things, somebody with their right mind seeing these accidents happen. When we talk about Kinder Morgan, I mean, lately, what do you think when you are fighting about an issue which has just happened and could be happening on way bigger scale, coming from Kinder Morgan, a company that has a bad record in safety, for example? We know about it. And by the way, have you heard of Enron company? Enron company, the two, Kinder and Morgan, these two guys, they were working in Enron company before its collapse and split out of that company before. And we know later what was Enron doing. It was scamming people and ripping off everywhere in California, and I think. So this is a lot of alarming here, but still, what do you feel when you see the government acting in that manner, supporting Kinder Morgan? Anna, what do you think, Anna?
Well, it's certainly been very disappointing to see the federal government campaign on a climate change platform and then approve pipelines which we know will make this worse. Now with this spill that we were talking about on Heiltsuk territory, I've been hearing from people we work with in Washington State who are also fighting various fossil fuel projects that now it's all going to go, much of it that used to go on tankers is going on barges because barges can actually pass through different legal loopholes. There is less regulation. So we can actually anticipate if Kinder Morgan goes ahead, much of this oil will be barged. And it will be barged again, some of it will go down to Oregon, Washington, and California to be refined. Some of it will go to Alaska. So again, up our coast, not just in the Salish Sea, but in the north. So those two cases make me really scared for the future. So that's partly why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to make sure that together we support those who are on the front lines fighting these projects.
So it's a big thing for Raven is to give an outlet to Canadians who are looking to make a difference, but maybe they're not willing to go to court against corporations, or they're not willing to go to court against our government or do what is happening up in Wet'suwet'en territory when they were living on the land in resistance camp, or the people on Lilu Island who set up a resistance camp against Patronus so that they could save the skina and the habitat of the salmon. And they lived there for over a year, and the people in Wet'suwet'en for years. And so then we're giving an outlet where maybe you're still going to live your regular life and make these small changes against climate change and the impacts of environmental racism that are facing Indigenous people, but to give something so that you can help this fight that's real. And we're seeing it constantly happen, whether it's to the Heiltsuk or to the Salish people here within Coast Salish territory that are fighting in every way possible, because we're seeing it as not just a fight for ourselves and our future generations, but it's for our land, and it's for our waters, and it's for all people who've continued to come even when they were not invited and to oppress us. We're fighting for you too. So that's like, it blows my mind that people don't see that, but then at the same time it really lightens my heart, and it I guess picks me up a lot when you see people give so generously to Raven and ultimately to Indigenous peoples who are fighting for our environment and for Indigenous rights.
About the actual resistance on the ground, would you tell us a little bit more about these? Like, do you see, like, for example, is a continuation of what happened in North Dakota, for example?
For sure. Well, I had the opportunity to go to Standing Rock and to go to Lilu Island and spend time as part of this resistance and be part of actions against Kinder Morgan. And I see it as we're fighting in all different realms. We're doing whatever we can for the future generations. I work for an organization where we're looking at ocean observing systems so that we can understand what's happening to our climate, what's happening to the changing ocean, but fighting that resistance in every form, and whether you're just finding your little nook to make change. And some people who can sacrifice their lives to live on Lilu Island against Patronus, or to live out in North Dakota in Standing Rock in freezing weather. And if what you can do is if you can contribute funds to Raven, you're still part of that resistance. You're still actively asserting yourself against the standard, against what's being put onto us as normalized way of existing within our life. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
It is one more action, like it's you do everything possible. You knock, as they say, on all doors, and again, and by taking this corporation to the court, at least again, people will. This is in the end the tax money of people, Dad. So it's important to people to know and hear about it. Anything about Kinder Morgan for Raven?
Well, so we are raising money for these 4 nations who are doing both federal and provincial court challenges. So they are the Tsartlip, the Squamish, the Secwepemc, and the Coldwater.
And how come we have 2 processes here, provincial and federal?
So basically it's a federal responsibility, so that's why all of the nations have launched a federal challenge, because it was Justin Trudeau's government who gave the permits for this pipeline to proceed, and the National Energy Board who did a process that excluded those nations, or largely excluded them. For the Coldwater, for example, the pipeline would go right over their aquifer, which is near their reserve is near Merritt, which is very similar to the Dakota situation. When that pipeline leaks, and it has leaked like a couple of times in the past couple of years, the existing one. So if the new one goes through there and leaks, they'll lose their drinking water. And the government didn't even know and didn't even have that information that there was an aquifer there. So federal government bears the biggest responsibility for the project. The provincial government under Premier Clark also gave permits, which the current government is standing behind. So that case was launched last year. Or was it this year? No, it was this year, yeah, in January. Like, things happen so fast. So that case was launched under the old government. And again, fighting from every angle. because the provincial government also has a duty to Indigenous peoples.
And with the new provincial government, do you, let's hear from both of you, do you think anything would be changed, different would be than the liberal, sorry about that.
It's hard to say. It's the kinder form of colonization, the liberal government. So again, you see this government pushing nation to nation, but then excluding nations when they're trying to work towards agreements and reconciliation. So I'm not seeing major change happen. I mean, I'm hopeful, but it's the reality. With every government, you still see the oppression of Indigenous people. With our lands, our waters, more kids in care now than there was at the height of residential schools. You see it with policy, you see it at every angle. And one major change you see within the school system is the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, K to 12, in every subject. So that's a change. So maybe we're going to change the mentality of the way young people are thinking, so the next generation who's coming up isn't just buying into the same system of existing, but maybe they're understanding that there's an importance to connecting with the place that you're living. If you're calling Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton home, then understand the protocols of that land, understand the protocols of that water, know who your local Indigenous people are. And that's the change in curriculum, so maybe that's the change in mentality.
In Arabic, we have an Arab author once said, it's part of morality not to be at home in one's home. And that is what's happening. We are on unceded land. Meanwhile, the one who is taking care of business here, not the owner of these or the native of of this land here, or as we call them, the people of the land. Anna, anything else you would like to tell about coming soon in Raven? You'd like to tell us about? We still have like a couple minutes.
Well, I would just like to encourage people to visit our website, raventrust.com, and you will see a drop-down menu that lists all the cases. You can click on the Heiltsuk case and please donate, or on the Kinder Morgan case, or anything else that you feel really personally urgent. I'm sure you will find something. We also have a Facebook page, so please come and visit us and click on us and like us and see the videos. And we just have a new Kinder Morgan video that was released a couple of weeks ago. And get informed and get involved and participate. It
would be great if you send us a copy of that video. And again, the website is?
raventrust.com.
Qatuwas. And Anna. It's an honor to meet both of you and to hear about Raven and what they are doing. Thank you very much for coming on the show and to tell us about your work. Thanks, Qatuwas, and thanks, Anna. And thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice.